fantastic to be here. I really appreciate it. Before I get started, I usually speak, I'll let you know right now, I usually speak for much longer periods of time, 3 to 5 hours to EO chapters, and I've got like 50 minutes, so I'm probably going to be talking really, really fast. I am going to try to have a question and answer period built in here, and I usually try to have an interactive process going on at the same time that we're doing these, when I'm doing these kinds of presentations. The reason I bring that up is if I'm speaking and something's not clear to you, it's not clear to anybody else. I've been doing this for many, many years. I try not to use PowerPoint presentations. I try to communicate with everybody, look everybody in the eye so I can tell whether or not everybody's glazing over. And then I know I better slow down, review. So feel free to stop me. But because our time here is so short this morning, I've been thinking a great deal about what am I going to cover? What do I really want to get through to everybody this morning with respect to what's going on in the economy? And one of the big things I do is destroy myths. There are myths and memes that go on in the financial markets that are, a line gets told and then it gets repeated and it gets repeated again, and it has nothing to do with reality. It's all false, and this goes on every single day. And there are hundreds of these types of issues I deal with, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to try to blow away some of the myths that are currently running the gamut in the marketplace, that are on CNBC with some of the guys I work with. And so I'm going to get straight into that. But if you have any questions at all, or if I'm not making sense, please feel free to go ahead and stop me. I only put together about 4 or 5 different pieces of information that I really wanted to get over to you. I'm going to start with a section on China, given the fact that Governor Romney during the second presidential debate talked about China being a currency manipulator. So I'm going to hit that real quickly because this is an issue that's going to be increasingly a part of the media meme regardless of who wins this next presidential election. And it's also completely wrong. And then I'm going to talk about quantitative easing and monetary policy. I will tell you right now, the entire purpose of monetary policy and quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve is not to cause inflation, contrary to what everybody says. As a matter of fact, it's to do the exact opposite. It's to cause deflation, and I will talk to you about why, and why so many people in the marketplace can't figure out why interest rates are going down when the Fed's stimulating. And then I'm going to get to, should I have time, China versus the United States, because we are on a war trajectory. We are. It's all about peak oil. And this is what Governor Romney meant when he talked about China being a currency manipulator just a little while ago. Now, if I get through all of those, I'm either going to open it up to questions or I'm going to get into a whole other list of issues I have. But I'm going to be talking very quickly, as I probably already am. So let's get to China as a currency manipulator. Second presidential debate, Governor Romney says if he gets elected, he is going to mandate that through Congress, China is considered to be a currency manipulator and they're going to prosecute them for such. This is really nonsense. This is really all about oil, but he can't say it's about oil. So I want to talk about how China accesses its holdings of U.S. treasuries, which is what this is really all about. I'm sure many of you have heard the meme, China owns $2 trillion of U.S. treasuries, which means they're lending money to the U.S. government, which means actually China owns the United States now, right? How many people have heard that? Pretty much everybody, right? It's completely wrong. It's the exact other way around. And this is really important to understand. Money flows into a country from outside of that country only 3 ways, and it works the same for everybody. One is called foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment, well, before I get started, does anybody do business in China? Anybody here? Great. Then this will make complete sense to you. Because people that do business in China know all about this, and they wonder why people in the media in the United States don't get it. When you do business in China, and you bring your money into China to do business, it's called FDI, foreign direct investment, and it can be used for a whole variety of purposes. You can build manufacturing facilities with it or whatever. But when you bring your dollars in, your Federal Reserve notes, those things we call dollar bills, you have to convert them to yuan or renminbi, which is the Chinese currency. China is closed. Their currency does not trade outside of China. You take that currency outside of China, it's monopoly money. So if you bring your money in to do business there, you put it in whatever bank, there are several banks in China you can do business with, those dollar bills will migrate over to the People's Bank of China, the PBOC it's called, which is sort of similar to the Federal Reserve in the United States. It's not exactly the same, but it's a similar concept. And those dollar bills then end in dollarized assets, U.S. Treasuries, and are held in what's referred to as the foreign reserves account. Now, before going further, that money going into those foreign reserves is not China's money. That money belongs to and is the property of principally the U.S. investors, which is where about 80% of foreign direct investment comes from that goes into China. It's their money. This is very similar to what would occur if you went to a casino and you brought your dollar bills in and you converted them to chips, and they gave you the chips and you ran around the casino and did all kinds of stuff, and when you went back you wanted to convert those chips to your dollars because outside of the casino those chips are worthless. It's the same exact concept. Here's the issue though. As businessmen, U.S. businessmen bring the money in, this is just foreign direct investment now, deposit it in, do business, they want to make sure that their dollars are carried in dollarized assets. Principally, the way you do that is you invest in U.S. Treasuries. So it's not China wanting to manipulate its currency, it's that they have to deposit this money over in U.S. Treasuries so that U.S. business people, and again, it's principally United States business people in China, feel comfortable knowing that if they ever need to get their money back out, they can see it's sitting over there in reserves. Just like if you were to go to a casino, one of Trump's casinos or Steve Wynn's casinos or something, and you thought that they were taking your money and doing something else with it, or you got wind that somebody went to the window and was told, you're just going to have to wait a while, we don't have enough money. There'd be a run. Everybody would realize my chips are worthless. China knows they have to prevent that from happening in their own country, because if a U.S. investor went to the PBOC and said, I need to get my money back, and they said, well, hold on, we don't have it, we'll have to convert our euros to dollars and things like that, all of a sudden people would panic. And all of the money that's been flowing into China would flow back out of China, and China would collapse. So they don't want that to happen. So they hold the money in U.S. Treasuries. Now, the second source of funds flowing into the country is what's known as speculative money, or hot money flows. This money is often brought in by the same guys that are planning on doing real investments, substantial investments, infrastructure investments, but it's not supposed to go into anything other than something liquid. It's betting money, in other words. This money, however, as well, and it causes volatility in capital markets and things move all over the place, this money as well, however, goes through the entire system that FDI does, ends up at the PBOC. The PBOC, People's Bank of China, has to turn around and buy treasuries. Now, the third source is organic. That's what most of us are familiar with. That's where Chinese factories, whether they're owned by China, the state, or Chinese citizens, or partnerships with U.S. or European investors or whatever, sell their goods overseas, and then that money flows back into China. So you basically have those three ways: spec, FDI, and organic. There's about $3 trillion in foreign reserves in China right now. About $2 trillion of that is in U.S. Treasuries. Now, about half of those U.S. Treasuries are represented, and it might be more. It's actually 30 to 50% of the entire foreign reserves that China has are representative of FDI and spec money and the profits built off of these. The reason I bring that up is what this means is China is doing nothing more than basically babysitting this money for U.S. investors. Is this making sense to everybody? So putting into U.S. Treasuries, it's not their money. It would be like me as a money manager saying, I've got $300 million or $400 million or whatever. It's my client's money. It's not mine. I just get paid a fee for babysitting it for them. All right? Now, U.S. business people in China keep an eye on this all the time, and they want to make sure those foreign reserves are there and being held in U.S. Treasuries, because if they're not, if China turns around and starts taking either the money they're babysitting or even their own money and doing something other with it than putting it into U.S. Treasuries, they run the risk that U.S. business people are going to say, uh-oh, there's a problem, I might not be able to get access, and two things occur. They either begin to move out of China and or slow their investments in China, which becomes a real problem for China, because it's the FDI, principally, spec money as well, but mostly the foreign direct investment, that is the asset base, the equity upon which the entire Chinese miracle over the past 30 years and increasingly over the past 10 or 20 years is based. In other words, what I'm telling you is Although we're told that China owns the United States, it's the other way around. It's U.S. investors that are holding China hostage, basically. They have no choice than to do what they're doing. The result of this also is their currency is being manipulated. It's tied to the U.S. dollar. So as the dollar goes down, the won or the renminbi goes down. Now, Governor Romney knows this. Everybody knows this. Nobody talks about it because, well, their real goal is to prevent China from getting access to oil. The U.S. government wants the Chinese government and the Chinese economy to slow down because of a fight over oil, okay, which I will get to momentarily. Primarily, though, for that section, the meme is it's not the China that owns the U.S., it's the U.S. that owns China, okay? Now, over to quantitative easing, which has been in the media now for like 4 years. During the late 2008, Lehman Brothers goes under in September. By December, the interest rates in the United States fall. Fed funds rate, the target rate that the Federal Reserve uses to advise banks to lend money to each other to meet overnight lending requirements, falls to 0%, which is where it is today. It's been there for 4 years. This is the only time it's ever been at this rate. Even in the 1930s, it never went below 1%. What I'm telling you is this is an event that we are living through right now in the United States that not only is unprecedented, but was supposed to be impossible. According to academics, according to theory, we were never supposed to be here. The zero bound, Fed funds rate going to zero, was always supposed to be something that was off in the distant theoretical world. Well, we're living it right now. Adam Smith, 250 years ago, which is basically one of the foundational he provided, he was a sociologist, economist 250 years ago, provided the foundation upon which virtually all different types of Western economic theories are based. And he introduced a concept known as the invisible hand. The invisible hand basically stipulates that if something's too good to be true, it won't happen. And subprime mortgages were too good to be true, and they happened. And what I mean by that is even if there was no private executive management oversight of the banking institutions and the non-banking institutions, preventing their people from doing things like this. And even if there were no federal regulators, public regulators looking over this, and both of those organizations failed, both private and public, the people, the functionaries involved, the people responsible for making mortgage loans, subprime mortgage loans, the appraisers, the underwriters, the people actually borrowing, and the people buying the bonds that were backed by these mortgages, principally Europeans, somebody within this process should have simply said, we're not going to do this. This isn't right. This doesn't make any sense. This is too good to be true. And that didn't happen. So it's not just that corporate America failed and then public America failed. Society itself failed. I was on the radio back when this was going on. I had a radio show for about 15 years. And when real estate was going up at 20% a year, everybody remember? Most people felt great. This is fantastic. This is the next new economy. Everybody's going to be wonderful. I remember somebody calling my radio show, though, and he said, Roger, I just finished my PhD. I've got my first job. I've got $150,000 or so in debt. And he was in tears. He said, I did everything right. I did everything the way I was told to do it. And now I can't buy a home. And you could hear the pain in his voice. He was saying, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to have a family. I'm never going to achieve anything, because he was convinced that home prices were going to keep going up. And I said, dude, chill out. It's impossible. And it literally was impossible. And I told many, many people during this period of time, this is a mania. It's going to stop. We don't know what it's going to look like. We know it's going to be bad. And I had outlined for people, once this thing does roll over, Fannie and Freddie were going to go, Countrywide was going to go, B of A was going to go, Bear and Lehman were going to go. And people said, you're nuts. And I said, yeah, you'll wait. Wait till you see what happens. Eventually, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage is going to get to 3%. The 10-year Treasury yield is going to get to 1%. I was talking about this 8, 9 years ago, and people said, man, you are crazy. And here we are. Now they're like, wow, man. You might have got that right. And now they keep asking me, where does it go from here? Now I'll tell you real quickly, more than likely, because of the actions that are being taken by the Federal Reserve, this is where we get to quantitative easing being deflationary, 30-year fixed rate mortgages that are currently in the 3.5% range at par, my feeling is in as little as 6 months, it's probably going to be longer, but we're going to get into the twos, and it could go as low as 2% for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Now this is what they're doing on purpose. This isn't an accident. Okay, I want you to understand something. There's a concept known as the ABCs of global macro. I wasn't going to get into this, but I'm going to do this real quickly. The ABCs of global macro stipulate this. A is, and this is the way everything in the world, the genesis of everything in the world. A is as goes housing, so goes the U.S. economy. Don't ever forget it. If you get nothing out of anything else I'm talking about, remember these three rules. As goes housing, so goes the U.S. economy. The B is as goes the U.S. economy, so goes the world economy. And the C is what's good for the U.S. is good for the world. Okay? And some people might say, no way. Believe me, that's exactly the way it all works. So if you're trying to figure out where the world is going right now, you've got to follow the United States. And if you want to figure out where the United States is going, you've got to follow housing. If somebody tells you things are going great and you're looking over the housing sector going, no, that doesn't look right, trust me, they're wrong. Always follow housing. Doesn't have to be that way. It is that way. It's been that way increasingly since the 1930s when FDR created the Federal Housing Administration and then launched several others up in between there. Won't get into all of this stuff in detail. Eventually, it won't be as goes housing, but for right now, it is. Ben Bernanke finally realized that. He had his own little epiphany a couple of weeks ago when the announcement was made that we're going to go into Quantitative Easing 3. Does everybody remember? This is the Federal Reserve coming out and saying, I'm going to print up more dollar bills, basically open-ended, no limit now. Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve, came out and said, I'm going to buy $40 billion a month of mortgage-backed securities, not U.S. Treasuries, specifically mortgages. He's targeting the housing industry now and basically saying, I'm coming in to save the day. Now, they should have done this in 2008, 2009. They finally did it now. So I'm becoming increasingly more, my outlook is less negative. There are some good things happening, but we'll see how it goes. The point is, however, Ben Bernanke now realizes if you don't fix housing, you don't fix the U.S. economy. If you don't fix the U.S. economy, there's no way the world economy is going to get fixed, and this whole thing is just going to keep spiraling down. We're not going to follow Europe. We're not going to follow Asia. We're going to fix this, and it's going to be done right now. There are a lot of people also arguing about this right now. People in the media, in the financial media, guys I work with saying, oh my God, he's going to destroy the dollar. He's going to destroy the U.S. economy. He's going to destroy the U.S. Treasury. The United States government's going to go broke. This isn't going to work. What we need to do is shrink the government rather than expand the government, right? Have you heard this? It's basically austerity versus print and spend. Let me address that real quickly. This decision was made 50 years ago, all right? The austerity crowd lost. Now, they had 50 years, and I'll get into what those dates are in a minute, to argue for in the event that we ever faced a 1930s deflationary type event, that the proper response was to shrink the government, lower taxes, and maybe that's really the right thing to do. But the point was, in 1963, coming out of, we ended World War II, the Depression had ended previously to that, the U.S. economy was strong enough that we could begin to have this argument of why didn't the print and spend that we implemented in the 1930s work? Because it didn't work. We printed money, that's monetary stimulus, and we spent money, that's fiscal stimulus. And the economy still rolled back over into a deeper depression in the 1937-38 time frame, which launched us into World War II as part of our corrective action. So economists and academics started turning around saying, well, why didn't it work? And these two theories, there were actually several theories that percolated up through the system, but the two dominant became, one was Austrian school. The Austrian school of economic theory stipulated that, I won't get into it in detail, but basically, if we ever face deflation again, that what we need to do is shrink the government. The other school, which is basically Keynesian, monetarist, Friedmanite school, stipulated that the reason it failed in the 1930s was because we didn't do enough of it and we didn't do it quickly enough. And so that if we ever face a deflationary type event, an actual contraction in the economy, what we need to do is print up a whole lot of money really, really fast and spend it really, really fast. And that will kick us out of it automatically. Basically, these two theories are completely opposite of each other, right? The expand, print and spend was put together by a guy, codified by Milton Friedman. Anybody not heard of Milton Friedman? Okay. And this was in 1963. These two books were published and represented these two warring sides of economic academia. The other was a guy by the name of Murray Rothbard. Anybody heard of Murray? Okay. See, nobody ever remembers the losers. But this is what happened. And then even as the debate was still occurring, President Kennedy got shot. The country got very serious. The decision was made within academia, within the business community, within our public sector, that we need to move on. The decision was made like a baseball game being called on account of rain, that the Austrians lost, the Friedmanites, Keynesians, monetarists, expand won, and the decision was made, stop discussing this, we're going to get on to other issues. If we ever face this again, break glass, print and spend and repeat until it either works or we're broke. Swear to God. But it was never supposed to happen. Everybody thought we don't really need to worry about this ever because it's never going to happen anyway. The problem is, taking humanity into account, especially the way the guys I work with on Wall Street do things, if you tell them you've got the answer, the magic bullet here, they're going to do something to make sure that that bullet needs to be used. And that's what we did. And what we're discovering now, print, spend is, oh my God, it's not working. QE1, which was about $1.6 trillion by the Federal Reserve, which is massive. That was twice the size of their entire balance sheet prior to the crisis. It was 1.2 plus a little bit more. $600 billion in QE2, didn't work. The Fed then went to Operation Twist, where they printed money up and started buying long-term treasuries to force long-term interest rates down so they would drag down auto loan rates and mortgage rates, etc. Still didn't work. Federal Reserve finally again had its epiphany where Ben Bernanke realized if we don't fix housing, a paradox of thrift is going to set in. Do you know what a paradox of thrift is? Anybody? Have you ever heard of it? Paradox of thrift is this, and we all deal with this, but you definitely don't want your economy dealing with this on a regular basis. Paradox of thrift stipulates that people can become conditioned to believe that if they wait, money, cost of goods, and everything else gets cheaper. So postpone your consumption. Well, what happens is this just drives the economy right down the toilet bowl, because consumption is 70% of economic activity. What Ben Bernanke has been doing with his first two rounds of quantitative easing in driving interest rates down is getting people to understand, I'm not going to buy a home now when mortgage rates are at 4% because Roger just said they're going to 3. I'll wait till they get there. And they get to 3 and I say they're going to 2 and people say they're going to wait. Ben Bernanke finally realized, oh my God, the paradox of thrift is being built into the U.S. economy and I've got to stop this thing. You stop it with a shock. You stop it by announcing you're going to go out and buy $40 billion a month, and it might as well be $100 billion a month because it's going to be whatever it is he thinks he has to do. And I want to touch on this real quickly because it's not understood. Nobody's getting this. When the Federal Reserve comes out and says we're going to buy $40 billion a month of mortgage-backed securities, the banks don't have the right, the opportunity to say, yeah, well, we just don't feel like making that many loans. The way our Federal Reserve System works is there's no legal constitutional requirement built into the Federal Reserve's mandate that makes the banks do what the Fed tells them to do. But if they don't, Congress is going to step in and you're going to see the Federal Reserve System being done away with. So when Ben Bernanke comes out and says, I'm going to buy $40 billion a month of mortgage-backed securities, he's telling the banks, you need to go make another $40 billion worth of mortgages every single month. Now, to put that in perspective, right now that's about half of the mortgage originations going on a national basis. So this was not a little thing. This was a massive, massive move a couple of weeks ago. And people in the financial markets are still not getting it. This is Ben Bernanke saying, I'm not going to worry about Congress because they have not addressed housing or anything else. I'm not going to worry about the executive branch and what's going on there because they haven't addressed it either. This is up to me, and if I don't fix it, it's my legacy that's going to pay the price because you know they're all going to blame it on him anyway. Seriously. So he's going out and he's doing this. What that means is he has now got to force, this is where we get to that quantitative easing monetary policy is deflationary, not inflationary. He has actually got to force the cost of money down, which is deflation. He is forcing money down and lowering the cost of capital. This is no different than there being a bid-ask spread in anything. You need to buy a new car and you go to the dealer and you say, I'll give you $20,000, and the dealer says, well, I need $25,000. And you just sit there and stare at each other. The transaction's not going to magically close. The point is, buyers never have to buy. This is another major mistake a lot of my colleagues in economics make. Oh, eventually stuff wears out and people have to buy. No, they just do without. We learned this in Japan over the course of the past 20, 30 years or so. So what Ben Bernanke realizes is, we've got to get the cost of capital down to the bid, the rate at which people are willing. So what he's doing is doing that now. He is driving the mortgage rates down. Now, over the course of the past month or so, mortgage rates haven't come down since he made that announcement. And a lot of the people I work with are saying, oh my God, there's something wrong, it's not working, the Fed system is broken. And I just say again, dudes, it takes months to staff up for this sort of thing. Ben Bernanke just told the banking system, principally we're talking Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Citigroup, but also all of the brokers that they work with and lenders that they lend money to originate mortgages, that they've got to increase their production by 50%. Go tell your staff, by the way, it's Friday afternoon, by Monday I want you to be 50% more productive. Yeah. Oh my God. You're going to have to hire people. You're going to have to staff up. They're going to have to be trained. This thing is going to take months. The point is, the Fed is in it. They're not going to withdraw. They're going to do this. And as they do staff up and mortgage originations increase, you're going to start seeing mortgage rates come down. That's why I say it's going to take some time. But you see the mortgage rates are sitting in that 3.5% to 4% level. They're going to start falling off. And underwriting guidelines are going to start becoming less restrictive. They've become exceedingly restrictive over the course of the past, since 2008, even prior to that, as subprime began to go down really in 2006. To the point that it's ludicrous now. Has anybody gotten a mortgage recently? Oh my God, you never want to go through that again, right? It's crazy. They're going to do is start bringing those back down. It's not going to get as loose as it was 4 or 5 years ago. It's never going to happen. I think it should in some capacities, but we don't have time to get into that. A lot of what occurred back in the subprime days are not really well understood. There were some mistakes made, but the mistakes were not as large as everybody thinks, and they could have been more easily corrected without destroying the entire system and going back to these draconian underwriting guidelines that we have now. But unfortunately, they'll get a little bit looser. Money's going to get a whole lot cheaper. Housing is going to rebound. These things are going to take years. But the point is, when you're implementing quantitative easing, when you're putting this type of monetary policy in place, you are causing deflation. Your goal in doing this is to get the cost of capital down. That's the deflationary price aspect of it, so that you can cause inflation on the other end, which is increasing the rate at which money moves through the system. Now, this is very confusing for most people, so let me hit this. There are two kinds of inflation. Two. We don't have two different names for them, though. We just call them both inflation. So you watch these guys on TV, and one's talking about price inflation, and the other one's talking about real inflation. It's no different than two people speaking different languages. And I watch them, and I think, guys, you're talking about different concepts. But because we don't have different terms for them, people get very confused. Everybody should be very confused. So I want to hit this real quickly so you understand. It's not a difficult concept, by the way. You probably learned this in Econ 101 and forgot it. Everybody does. I mean, it's a boring subject to begin with. Price inflation is what most of us see. Gasoline prices going up, cost of bread going up, the cost of anything going up. We feel that, we see that. That's price inflation, okay? When an economist talks about inflation, though, unless they specifically are mentioning price inflation or talking about the cost of goods going up, if you don't hear them talking about that, what they're talking about is real inflation. Real inflation in economic terms is monetary inflation. It is the increase in the money supply. Now, the way that occurs is generally the Fed will lower interest rates, but we're at zero now and it's not working. So you implement quantitative easing, which is the printing up of dollar bills, and they take dollar bills, which are really nothing more, Federal Reserve notes, little green pieces of paper we call dollar bills, and they go to the bank and say, we've got $1 billion of these little green pieces of paper that don't earn any interest, and we're going to put them in your bank, and we're going to take $1 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries or mortgage-backed securities or anything else that are creating interest, paying interest, and we're going to put them on our books. Now, once you've done that, you've swapped $1 billion for $1 billion, billion not earning anything, $1 billion earning something. All of the income that's being earned is going to the Fed. It's no longer in the economy. They've just drained income out of the economy. They've actually deflated economic activity. And people say, well, that's bizarre. What's the point? The point is for the banks to then turn around and look at these little green pieces of paper and go, they're not earning any interest. We've got to do something with them. The goal is to make more loans. And when a bank makes a loan, which they haven't been doing recently, but again, with this $40 billion of mortgage-backed securities, the Fed just basically ordered the banks, you're going to start making loans. We're going to target mortgages right now, but if the Fed wants to come out and say, you know what, you're going to make commercial loans, you're going to make auto loans, I'm going to buy $10 billion a month of auto loans, they could do that. I'm not saying they're going to, but the Fed has basically told the banks, hey, you've had it a really good time for 4 years, taking the money, buying stocks, paying yourselves big bonuses, and playing golf. It's time to start getting back into the game, and I'm going to make sure this happens. So they have to take, the banks now have these Federal Reserve notes. The point is they have to go start lending them. This is where you get money supply growth from. This is, when a bank makes a loan, off of its core reserves. Again, the money you deposit in the banks, I deposit in the banks, the money the Fed puts into the banks is known as core capital, okay? Off of core capital, the banks can then lend about 10 times what they have. This is the way fractional reserve banking works. The very important aspect of this is that's where you get your inflation in the money supply. It doesn't come from the Fed. The Fed just provides the catalyst for it. You following me? It's the banks that make the loans that cause inflation. The reason this is important, and this is where everybody makes their mistake, is you've heard, there's an old saying that Milton Friedman, bringing Friedman up again, that inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. And what people have taken that to mean in the financial markets is that when the Fed prints up dollars, implements quantitative easing, that it automatically causes inflation. And I have to tell everybody, no, it causes deflation with the goal of making the banks have to basically work for a living by making more loans, which causes inflation. That link is extraordinarily important because if it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked so far, if the banks take that money and instead of lending it, go buy stocks, bonds, commodities, currencies, and/or real estate, the 5 basic classes of assets, which everything else is a derivative of, and it doesn't get into the economy by way of loans being made, the monetary base does not increase and the money supply doesn't increase, and you get no real inflation, and as a result, the price inflation that usually precurses it on expectations that it's coming, then falls back over. And people get very disheartened. So you see prices for goods going up, and then the demand for them doesn't increase because the loans never actually got made, and then all of a sudden price cutting goes back into effect. And that's where you get the risk that there's going to be this paradox of thrift that begins to get built into the marketplace, which again, Ben Bernanke is trying to stop right now. Okay, so quantitative easing monetary policy is in the beginning deflationary. It is not inflationary. Only if it successfully causes the banks to make more loans can it cause real inflation. And basically that then becomes a virtuous cycle. Because once a loan is made, and it's made out of thin air. You know, what I commonly tell people is, remember when your parents were telling you that wouldn't it be nice if money grew on trees? Well, if you're a banker, it doesn't even have to grow on a tree. You just literally book enter it. But I made a loan. Can I have my bonus now? You know, you're kidding me, right? That's worse than sweeping the stuff under the rug. I mean, but that's the way our system works. And as the monetary base increases, the velocity of cash flow, because when you make a loan, the guy that receives the loan doesn't just say, well, okay, thanks, and I guess I'll go get lunch. They got to do something with it. There's a purpose the loan got made. It's not just, dude, you can qualify for a loan. Why don't you take some money? There's a purpose for the whole thing. So that economic activity occurs and money starts driving through the system and demand starts increasing and confidence goes up. When confidence goes up, people start buying more stuff, and then, your wife says, our friends just bought a new home, so guess what we're going to do? I guess we're buying a new home. And that's what happens, is all of a sudden economic activity starts driving. Consumption is 70% of economic activity. So once you can fix consumption, which requires fixing confidence, which requires coaxing people into the marketplace with lower and lower costs of capital, which is actually deflationary again, you can actually then cause the inflation on the other side. Yes, sir.
I'm enjoying this, Roger. Thank you.
Okay.
But tell me why, if you are basically describing a re-leveraging
Yes.
To get out of the deleveraging pain that we've gone through in the last 3-4 years, why is this movie different than the one we saw before?
Which movie? You mean the 1930s?
No, just
The one we just got through?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. You need money to move through the system in order to fix your problems. If money's not moving, there's no way. Have you ever not had income and tried to pay your bills? Once you have income, you can start revenue. Let's not even call it income, revenue. We all know that, right? I got revenue and there's nothing left for me. I'm not just an economist. I've put several companies together, some of which have been successful. I'd love to tell you that story someday, but we don't have time again right now. But some have crashed and burned. I've taken companies public and had them crash and burn afterwards. That feels really bad. It happens. It does. It happens. There's a whole lecture series I do on failure, by the way, which I go through all my failures, and some of the guys I've worked with say, don't talk about that. Like, why? It happens. It's life. You'll recover. But the point is, we have got to get to a point where we have income running through the system again, revenue running through the system. If you have money flowing through the system, we can begin to correct some of the problems the system is having. If we don't have the money flowing through the system, there's nothing we can do. So we do run the risk that we are creating another bubble, and we are watchful for that now. Some of those bubbles have already been created. Stocks, bonds, gold, in the currency markets have already begun bubbling. In other words, the money that's been going in by the Federal Reserve has not been getting into the real economy. It has not been causing expansion of the monetary base. Loans have not been getting made. The bankers have been turning around and taking the money and driving up other assets. Now, that's part of the process as well. Unfortunately, this is the way our financial system works. When we implement this sort of thing, it's kind of like pouring champagne into the tier, and the top bottles get the top glasses get it, and then it spills over. What the Fed's been hoping is, as the bankers get satiated on all of the money that's been given to them by the Federal Reserve, that eventually they'll get back to doing their job of making loans. In which case we get to the point, once that does occur, that maybe we're creating another bubble. Unfortunately, it hasn't occurred, and what keeps happening is they keep putting more champagne in, and it just never gets down. And if that occurs, we're going to have an even bigger problem if that continues. But that's also why the Federal Reserve, rather than putting money in and buying treasuries, is now putting money in and buying mortgage-backed bonds. It is possible, though, that we will end up causing an even bigger problem, more bubbles in the marketplace. But part of that is the goal, to cause inflation on the other end. And if you can successfully cause inflation, now we've at least got the revenue where we can start adjusting and fixing these things. If we don't, we have deflation. And believe me, deflation is a black hole of destruction that you just simply don't want to go through.
My fear is that it's the same players at the top. It's the same.
Listen, I teach for Law Line, continuing education for attorneys. I was just speaking last week in New York with Ben Stein. Did anybody see that video? I don't know if it's even out yet. I got up and gave a presentation about the mechanics of the economy that the lawyers need to be aware of, and then Ben got up and he talked about, and he's an economist and an attorney. Ben's Bueller? Bueller? Yeah, okay. If you don't know, just ask somebody, they'll tell you. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He looks just like that, by the way. When he gets up and speaks, from the cameras only show up, he's wearing shorts and sneakers and stuff. Okay, I guess you can get away with it. I can't. But he got up and he gave a presentation on the fact that the way our laws work in the United States, we delude ourselves into believing that we are a land of laws. And he says, in reality, that's not what happens. That what we are is a society, in our legal system we're talking about now, where judges make their decisions about how they're going to rule on a case because of whether or not they had a fight with their wife that morning, what they think of the attorney on the other side of the argument or whatever. And then after they've made their decision, which usually is made very quickly, they will create or research or have somebody research for them the support, the legal precedents for that decision haven't been made. And so because you can find precedents on either side of an equation, all of these things end up going into an appellate process. And he says eventually people are going to discover that we are a land of men and not a land of laws, and that perhaps we will have a revolution as a result. Coming back to your point, this is something we just went through in the financial markets. There should be a lot of people in jail. That's all there is to it, all right? And I don't say that necessarily because people, you know, in the S&L crisis, Ivan Boesky went to jail, Michael Milken went to jail. This is back in the 1980s. It's a part of the risk that you run when you are involved in this sort of thing. In this situation, not only did people not go to jail, they're still in their positions, and not only and they haven't apologized. Okay, it's a really bad situation. The reason this has occurred is because, as far as I can tell, there's a standoff going on between regulators and the Department of Justice and the banking system, all of which have dirt on each other. And so there's been this kind of collective, everybody's pointing weapons at each other in the room, and nobody's going to pull the trigger, but nobody's going to back off. If you leave your position, if you retire, Pandit just retired from Citigroup. We're going to see if they go after him. He's kind of the first one out. He was the CEO of Citigroup. And he's out now, and everybody else at the other companies is going to be watching to see as he migrates now out away from the group, the herd, and doesn't have as much legal cover. Is some young attorney at the DOJ going to come try to get him and build their career off of it? And at the very least, we would have expected that to happen. So this is a very bizarre situation. If anybody's ever been caught in a situation where you're dealing with the government, these young bucks, that's the way they make their careers. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. It's the way our system works as well. If they think they can take somebody down and make their career off of it, they will. There was plenty of opportunity for the young attorneys at the Department of Justice to take down all kinds of people, and nobody's been taken down. So you got to wonder, how did they get to the point where they stopped all of this from occurring? And unfortunately, it has happened. I think it's very bad. I will tell you, I've been waiting for there to be some sort of an epiphany on the part of the American public that, hey man, we got our country stolen from us. And let me finish that thought with this and then get on to something else. By the way, I don't have a clock up here. How much time do I have? 2 minutes? Oh man. Listen, when we bailed out, all right, I'll finish with this then because I think this is very important to understand as well. When we implemented the Temporary Asset Relief Program in 2008, which was that was the U.S. Treasury loaning money to the banks to essentially, then they used this money on their balance sheets as their core capital. Does that strike anybody as odd right there? This is a concept known as balance sheet enhancement. It's illegal. It's illegal. And not just illegal from a domestic standpoint, but it's illegal from an international standpoint. The Basel Accords in Basel, Switzerland, which I won't get into, is part of our international agreements as to how our banks will maintain their core equity position. Core equity is supposed to be that equity. It's not borrowed money. Imagine you go to borrow money from a bank and the bank says, well, you're a little light on the asset side. So you say, oh, no problem. I'll just go borrow some assets and put them on my balance sheet. Bada bing. Can I have my loan now? Well, this is what we did. The U.S. government loaned money to the banks. They held it on their balance sheet as their assets, and all the domestic regulators and international regulators just looked the other way and said, okay, just make it work. Just make it work. because they figured if the banks go under again, at least the U.S. government. But this is also a real problem looking forward because we've lost transparency now from a legal perspective, from a financial perspective, not just here but around the world. People are looking at us. We are the leaders of the world. We are the ones that create the systems for the entire world to follow. And they're looking at us now going, okay, so you guys don't have to do it, but we do, legally, financially. And that's going to cause us problems in the future as well. This was a real issue. I wish we had never gone through it. I wish, my opinion was we should have nationalized the banks. And what I mean by that is you don't shut them down, but the equity that went into them should have been equity. The U.S. taxpayers should have gotten equity. We got it in Citigroup. We got it in AIG. We got it in GM. We should have just taken them all down. You get rid of the boards of directors. They had all failed. You get rid of the senior managers. Running a bank ain't that difficult, quite frankly. Jamie Dimon is not the rocket science everybody makes him out to be, nor is he an angel, all right? And you hold the shareholders accountable. You say 50% of your equity is now owned by the U.S. taxpayer, and then in the future, just as we did with GM and AIG and Citigroup now, you sell them off, and you tell the new buyers, listen, you drive this industry, this company into bankruptcy, we're going to take it away from you as well. That's what a bailout, that's part of the cost of a bailout. Unfortunately, I think I'm out of time, aren't I?
Yeah.
Listen, I got it.
Hey, Roger. Roger, let's take one more question.
Okay.
One more question, but a short answer.
Okay, all right. Listen, the principal reason I do this, as a matter of fact, when I was looking this morning as to what am I going to talk about, when I go into things like quantitative easing is deflationary, China is owned by the United States, it's not the other way around. These are issues that as far as I can tell, nobody else is, I'm not the only one that knows it, but nobody's telling people this. And there are multiple other, hundreds of other issues I could go into. The point is for you to become more critical of what you hear in the media. There's nothing that you can do, there is no direct correlation between I said this, you do that. What I will tell you is this. I do a lot of lecturing for EO, it's not a part of my business. I tell everybody I talk to, feel free to give me a call, I'm on Skype, send me an email, I'll get you, we can have a conversation about these issues and have a longer conversation. Every time I talk to EO, though, there might be two people that do so afterwards. That's why I always tell everybody, feel free to give me a call. And everybody says, oh, you can't do that. Nobody ever contacts me. So feel free. There you are, all right?
Great.